on now if you want to leave. Barb?
Yes.
Okay, everything is
Mhm.
live. So, Mr. Burley, if you're okay, we can start.
Yes, I am. We can start, Steve. Thank you.
Okay, as far as I know, no one signed up to observe the meeting as on Zoom. There may be people, of course, with nothing else to do, I guess, on YouTube. So that sounds like something I would probably do, but anyway, for planning and zoning for December, December 6th, manager's update just has reminders again, the same reminders that were on last month. The board vacancies are the biggest deal, and we will be advertising them. We already have started advertising them. We already started contacting people who are currently on boards to see if they want to re-up, if their term is up in the end of February. But we are still looking for new people. So if you want to spread the word too, eventually it will be on Savvy Citizen. Eventually it will be on our website. Some of it is already on the website, but I want to wait until I update it on our files and get some stuff out in the mail and via email before I actually put it on Savvy. So it will go out sometime. And plus, this is not a real great time to put things out anyway because of the holidays. But in any case, that's all I have.
Steve, I have
Okay.
a comment on the sidewalk inspection. I think that McMahon Associates did a survey of the sidewalks and filed a report. We have not ever taken that up in the Planning Commission for discussion. I mean, in the Planning and Zoning Committee for discussion. Do you want that on this committee or do you want it on public safety?
Well, what I actually mean by that is code enforcement related sidewalk inspection. Because
Well, the
Mr. Brand-
sidewalk survey was probably helpful to that regard because
Well-
it did talk about the status and condition of the sidewalks throughout the borough.
Well, Mr. Branzel normally reports, and that's
Ah,
why I
okay.
put it on here. When he's doing something with it, that won't happen now for a while. But
Mhm.
that's why I keep it on there. It wasn't intended to be anything else other than that. That's why I have it there as a reminder. Not that it couldn't be other things, but that's what I have. Does anybody have any questions for me? If not, that's all I have, Mr. Burley.
Thank you, Steve. All right, Don, are you ready for your report?
Yeah, I really don't have anything of importance to report tonight, but if anyone has something they would like to discuss with me, I'd welcome that.
Well, Don, I did put on your report the tree maintenance bids, which I'm showing on the screen now for everybody.
Oh,
so they can
okay.
see it.
Yeah, I did.
So I think Crusper is the low bidder on both pruning and removal. Did you want to comment?
Exactly. No, nothing there to report other than I had in question there the $8,750 for a removal bid seemed a little bit low. So I called the gentleman and asked him if he had made a mistake. And he said, no, he said he just wants the business. So that's where we ended up. But that is a firm figure.
I have a question. Do they have an arborist on staff? A certified arborist?
That I can't really tell you. I have to check with him. I think he is, but I'm not really sure.
Well, I would like to
Yeah.
know that before we award that bid, because I think it's important that we have a certified arborist within the bid, because otherwise we have to get one outside when we need advice on things.
But yeah, this is Jack. Angelo couldn't be here tonight, so he had two questions, one of which Patty just asked. I don't know what the request for bid, if it specified the requirement for an arborist. So that might be a problem, but Angelo brought this up, and I kind of agree with Patty also that that may not be an appropriate bid if they don't have access to an arborist. So it's something that we may want to look into. The second question Angelo had was, where are the bids open? Are they routinely done in tree and shrub, or was that, or are they done in the office like other things are done?
They're done at the Tree and Shrub Committee at the
Okay.
meeting. And everyone was
And-
there and witnessed everything.
Okay. All right, that's all I had. Thank you.
I have a quick question, Dawn. Apparently there was a tree that fell across the pathway leading from Cook Park up to, is it Sharon Drive maybe?
You mean from Forest Ridge down to,
Yes, I'm sorry, Forest Ridge.
right?
Do we have any resolution to that matter, or it's kind of hanging over the pathway that's kind of used by, I mean, I'm not sure how many people are using it, but I mean, it's a public cut through. People use it, I would say, fairly regularly. Is that a
That is
private
strictly-
tree? Is it our tree?
That's a private tree, Frank, and that belongs to the Forest Ridge Association. Jim and
Okay,
Jim.
have they been notified, and do we have a
To my
plan in place
knowledge-
to mediate the issue?
To my knowledge, yes, they have been notified.
Okay, and then do we have any remediation planned for it, or?
Well, it's a common ground there, and that doesn't really belong to us. It belongs to the association. I even checked that up with Mr. Corbel. We had an issue up there
Okay,
once
so it's-
before.
I see. Okay. So it might be just bad information and that I have. I apologize if that's the case. So it's not borough property, in other words, that we need to worry about it or feel that we might be liable in any way.
To the best of my knowledge, yes.
Okay. And Steve, are you familiar with that? Don mentioned that you guys have discussed this, or?
Yeah, we've talked about it, Frank. And Don's correct. It's common ground. It's not the borough's responsibility.
All right, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
Okay, in my committee report, I don't really have anything listed, but I just like to say that we at Planning and Development are trying to work with public safety on the part of the comprehensive plan that Dr. Patty DeMarco put together for us for 10 years. There's a section that we're concerned about the kids having their crossings, senior citizens crossing. So Angelo and I are working closely trying to make sure that part of that program gets satisfied. And that's all I have to report.
Anybody else have anything else for planning and zoning? Okay, I guess we're done then.
Yes, we're done, Steve.
Okay, so let me move on to finance here in a second. Okay, I'm ready with finance, Ms. DeMarco, if you're okay with me
Thank you,
starting.
Steve. You're going to go through the cash flow. I have a couple of questions on some of this stuff. So when you get down to the changes to the fee resolution, I have some things I'd like to raise if you want to proceed.
Okay, well, I'm going to start here now. I have
Mhm.
a PowerPoint that I'm going to show with all my notes, I hope, if it works. There we go. Nope, I don't think is it showing?
Yes,
It's showing just the white screen with there's no black showing at all? Because I can't tell for sure on my.
it's fine. There's the slide and then your next slide is there too.
Yeah, that's not what's supposed to be
So
showing.
you're in presenter mode.
All right, hold on a minute. Okay, there we go.
That's better.
All
Yeah.
right, so I have 3 items mainly on my report. Cash flow update, fee resolution draft, which is really a repeat from last month, and the final draft of the 2023 budget. Now, everybody got all these notes in detail. I just summarized them in this PowerPoint. So first with cash flow, year to date, it continues to be low. In this case, entering December from November. And in fact, it's the lowest cash flow for the same period for the past 6 years. If you look at the chart and look down, I think you can read it in this corner here where it shows November. We're entering December, ending November, entering December with 56,000, almost $57,000. As you can see, that's low, very low. And when I talk about the budget later, I'm going to actually show a different way of looking at that. That's not good. So that's the red line we're talking about here in this stats. I gave you on the chart rather, I gave you a spreadsheet also with it that shows numbers. Again, this is a snapshot and a point in time. So it's not necessarily where things are at the moment on December 6th, but this is as of the end of November. Again, I think it's a problem. I think that when you get your monthly report from Allison, the treasurer's report with all that detail, you need to look at it. And if you're not sure what's going on, you need to bring it up. Why is this happening? There's a lot of reasons. They include things like the lateness of the lateness of getting a person to actually do the billing and take that off of Allison. So we had one person doing 2 and 3 jobs at one time. And in my opinion, there were things in the budget that there were money spent that was not stuff that was in the 2022 budget as it was put together with other things. And I think that's the reason for it.
Mr. Morris, may I ask a question, please?
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry to interrupt.
Yep.
Just looking over the last few years and then zoning in on this present year, from August to September, it looks like there had to be over $600,000 paid out in 1 month.
Yeah.
What would account for all of that, the lateness in the year? I know you started to explain it.
Well, I'd have to go back. Let me see if I have my notes here in front of me. I'd have to go back and look at those.
I just wondered if there was a very large expense. You don't have to go to the trouble of looking through your notes.
Well, if I were to bring up, let me stop this a minute. And I'm looking at the spreadsheets that I gave you from August till September. And I don't see any one, wait a minute, that's the wrong month. I'm sorry. I don't see any one thing. I mean, the receipts were lower in September than we were used to a point. Police had a larger number paid out that month than they had before. I'd have to go and look at the
Police was
exact
high.
budget. I'm sorry,
The
what?
police in September was $717,989.
Right, I'd
It's
have to
really
go and
high.
I'd have to go
in-
back and look at the
in September.
AccuFund budget to try to see what that was specifically. I don't have access to AccuFund here right now. I mean, it would be, I could access it, but it would take me probably 10, 15 minutes to bring it up.
No, that's
Yeah,
not
so-
necessary. I just thought perhaps we purchased a large vehicle or something and
No,
I-
it was probably
would-
police overtime.
You'd want to go back and take a look at your monthly report for September that shows police in particular. I don't want to just blame it on them. I think receipts.
well,
are
weren't we
also
going to get
down.
reimbursed back from that from Allison had to bill them for the overtime? Wasn't there something like that?
Well,
Yes.
yeah, but I don't know if that's what it was or not. I don't, all I have is a number in front of me. I don't
Okay.
I don't know what the reason is. I'd have to go back and look through AccuFund.
Did
Let's see.
Allison submit that? Does anyone know?
Well, she did. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So let me see here. Let me go back to the PowerPoint, I think. Okay, so it is a concern. This is frustrating for me because this is like this is the second year in a row. Now, last year, part of it was because of the pandemic and money we were getting to reimburse ourselves from various federal funds, if you recall, and we had not decided how to allocate that money. And so we kept that money. Now, some of that money is still put aside. It's not actually been put back into, a lot of municipalities put it back into their budgets to compensate for the extra payments they may have had during the pandemic. We didn't do that either year. In fact, the ARPA funds in particular are earmarked for other things, not for reimbursing ourselves. So it could be also those things as well. But I think it's enough of a concern that everybody should pay attention to it as we go into 2023. I mean, the borough is sound financially. I say that all the time because there are times when I hear it isn't. This is one account, one fund that where we're having a little bit of an issue, and there are multiple reasons why it could be. But I think part of it too is just not paying attention to what's going on and not being careful about spending money that's not budgeted. I'm not saying that people are wildly spending money. I don't mean that, but when you start adding things up, $5 here, $105 there, it pretty soon gets to be an issue. So I just would like people to make sure they pay attention to this. It's enough, obviously, to make me worried about it. And, I just think everybody should be really concerned about it and start paying attention to it. Maybe
Yeah.
take more of a look at it in finance committee.
Steve, one of the things I've been concerned about is that when we put a budget together and we've budgeted for a certain expenditure, and then when we get the bids in for a project or something, it ends up being more, either because of inflation or because of conditions we hadn't anticipated. And council doesn't really have a good policy about what we do about reconsidering action on things when they're way over budget. And I think we need to talk about that at some point. I don't know if it goes under ops and policy, but I'd be willing to entertain that discussion under finance as an ongoing issue, because we have a number of times had things that were budgeted appropriately, but the estimates came in and then we proceeded to do things even when they were sometimes even double what the budget had.
Well, that's possible. I think
Yeah.
too, I think some of it, I'm not much of a chess player, but I know one of the things that people tell you when you're playing chess, especially ones who know what they're playing, who know what they're doing, is to see the whole board, not just to look at part of the board. And
Yeah.
that's one of the things in general that people need to do, not just focus on one particular thing, but look at the whole thing. And I know when I first started here, people weren't doing that. I think it's been better over the last 10 to 15 years. But I just want to make sure that we don't lose the idea of looking at everything, looking at the whole picture, not just looking at one line item or one bid, even for that matter, but looking at the whole thing. You're never going to have everything in every budget equal out. You're going to have some things that go over and some that go under. The key is to make sure you know that that's happening and make sure you pay attention to it when it does, so that you know whether or not, for example, you can spend more money on pruning trees because you're spending less money on the pool, for whatever reason. And I'm just throwing that out there as an example. So cash flow is something to pay attention to and take a look at. I don't know whether we'll end the year with a negative a number. Certainly the assessment issue has not helped either. And I saw a newspaper article about that again today, about how there is some controversy about, I think the council is introducing a bill, one of the councilors is introducing a bill where they may allow people to appeal for a past year or past months when they've lost an appeal, or if the ratio goes down or what have you. You'd have to read the article. It's a little bit more involved than what I'm ready to say here today, but it was in today's Post-Gazette, I know, if you wanted to take a look at it. I believe on either the front page or the front of the local section. Anybody else comment on cash flow? Question. All right, let me go back to the draft fee resolution. These are my notes from last month, so I'm not going to go into them. Nobody gave me any recommended changes. So I'm assuming you were okay with the changes I showed you. And just to run through them pretty quickly, there were changes with the engineer. Now, of course, there is an RFP being prepared on that. So that might be totally different by the time we figure that all out. So I'm not going to go into detail on that. We did up the zoning hearing board fee at the recommendation of Dave Naylor and building inspection underwriters, as well as Mr. Corbel. So we did raise that significantly. Building inspection underwriters didn't give me any other changes though, so I'm not going to go into anything else there. With Parks and Recreation, there was some changes to incorporate the amendment to the 22 fee resolution. That was a separate fee resolution, so it wasn't as part of the whole budget. I'm sorry, the whole document, the original document, but it included these areas: pool lodge, rental, and pool passes, etc. So I did call that to your attention last time. The trash and recycling fee, no one's talked to me about that or objected to it, but I think to be able to pay for it this year, it needs to go to 264, and seniors who qualify to 214. And that's based on increased costs for collection in 2023. And whoops, I'm sorry, I'm going ahead now to the final budget. I don't want to go there yet. Those are some of the main changes that were in the fee resolution. If nobody has anything else or everyone else is okay with things, I would give you that full resolution with these changes then to approve at the meeting on December 14th.
Steve, the only one I would want to comment on is the pool season pass. I know last year we reduced that tremendously, but I saw that the revenues from the pool had actually increased in this last year compared to the year before. So I think that lowering the fee per family actually did increase the number of families that we had using the pool, and I think that had its intended purpose.
If I'm not mistaken, I think daily admissions went down, but pool passes did go up.
The pool passes went up. That's what I was looking
Yeah,
at.
so you know, I mean, I don't think it was I think it was a positive, not an overall negative when you look at the two. Yes.
Right.
So,
I know there was some concerns about whether the revenues would fall significantly from doing that. And I was glad to see that hadn't happened.
does anybody have any other questions about the fee resolution
It's fine.
or any comments? Okay, well then you've seen it. I didn't give it to you. Well, I did give it to you again last week when somebody had asked me to send it out again. They gave you the same one that I'd sent you back in early November. So I'm going to clean that up so it's not redlined. And if you want, I will forward you all a copy of the final fee. In fact, I'm just going to do that next week, sometime just before the meeting. I'll forward you an unredlined version, a final version of the fee resolution, so you have that complete thing. And then I'll put it on for consideration for approval. So let me go into the third item I have, and that's the budgets. And this includes all the budgets, okay? I did not make a lot of major changes in the final draft from the preliminary, except for things that had been recommended to me by you folks. Some of it was in exec session and some of it was in public session. The exec session stuff had to do with salaries mainly. The public session had to do with a number of other issues. So this is what these next, I don't know, 6 slides are summary of what I have on your notes, on your agenda. So you have more detail on the written part than I have here in these slides. The thing that concerns me compared to the cash flow is while we show a positive cash flow at the end of November in that previous document, in this budget, when I put the numbers into year-to-date through November 30th, 2022, expenditures exceed revenues by $39,771. That's obviously a deficit. Why would that be different? Well, there's a number of reasons why. Don't forget, cash flow does not get corrected like the budget does and like the AccuFund does. So if there was a mistake or something where a particular item should have been charged to road, for example, and instead was charged to general fund, if it was fixed in the general fund, it may not show in the cash flow, but it would show in this number here year to date, because that's the actual number after all previous changes have been made. And that's probably one reason. Normally at this time of the year, we do not have that number showing red. We normally have a positive number of revenues greater than expenditures. Again, I want to add that this does not mean that the borough is in serious financial difficulty. It means people need to pay attention. That's all it means right now. I mean, I don't believe that Forest Hills is going to have a major negative problem with money, but this is one fund, and people should pay attention to it. When we do end up with a deficit, which this would only be the second time since I've been here that I've seen one, we usually cover it with the budget reserve, which is the reason why it's there. It's the emergency fund. There are also other monies that could be part of the general fund. I want to say this in public out loud for anybody who may be watching on YouTube. Other monies, for example, that could be part of the general fund that could reduce this deficit. One of those, I'll give you an example, is solar panels. If you recall years ago, well, those of you who are just on council this year would not remember this probably because unless you were attending. But if you recall years ago, when we built the new building, council was concerned about eventually having to spend money in about 7 years after the building went into operation on new solar panels, and was uncertain whether they would have to purchase them or make some other kind of arrangement. So the treasurer at that time, Wendy Archer, and I sat down and talked, and I said, look, whenever we end up the year with a surplus, take some of that surplus and put it into a separate fund. And I explained all this to council at that time. And nobody had any problem with it because that fund is controlled not by me, not by the treasurer. It's still controlled by council. It's just a way of banking money for the eventuality of having to do something with the solar panels on that building. And what you do with it, I don't know. I mean, I'm not enough of an expert on solar to know exactly what you would do. But one example is that money could be part of your budget. Excuse me, I'm talking too much. And so my throat is getting dry. That money could be part of the general fund and would automatically give you a surplus, not a deficit. So that's one reason why I say the borough is not in major problems. You could always take that money without any hesitation and say, okay, maybe we shouldn't put this much into solar. Let's put it back in general fund, and bam, now you have a surplus. And there's several $100,000 in that account. You should look at your treasury.
237,000.
Pardon me?
237,000.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact number, but if you have it in front of you, that's great. So any of that money could go into the general fund instead of what we did with it. But as I mentioned, I did inform council. Council had no objection at the time, so they knew we were doing this. It's just juggling money. So that's why I say we're not in financial difficulty. Okay. Now, as far as changes are concerned in the budget, the minor change I made to taxable assessed value is because there was a slight decrease in the total assessed value as of December 2nd. It went down a little bit, about 50, not quite $50,000. No, yeah, right. And $50,000 is a drop in the bucket as far as how much you would get in taxes from that. It's not a lot of money, but I did, because of the uncertainty I mentioned before with the assessment system, I did put a very conservative number in there as my estimate for how much we would take in real estate taxes in 2023. The other changes that were made, I adjusted the revenue estimates you see here in the middle of the screen, deed transfer, earned income, et cetera, because the numbers I was showing as to how much money we were making in revenue through the end of November was much higher than what I had budgeted. And so I raised those up somewhat. I still think they're conservative enough that that we're okay, but I did raise those up somewhat to add more revenue to my estimate. So the total estimated revenues and expenditures increased to a little over 7 million. The preliminary budget you looked at in November was at 6.97 million. This is a little over 7 million, or a 3.24% increase over 2022. Okay, so that's the changes that were made in revenue. Anybody have any questions? And I highlighted those on the handout I gave you in yellow to make them easy to find. Okay, let me go on to the next slide then. Expenditure changes. I have a couple of slides on this. The greatest change was discussed in exec session, the change to salary and benefits for everybody except police, because police is already covered by a contract. I was told to raise those salaries up to 2.5%. We originally had raised them 2%. That was the recommendation. Of course, that affected a few other line items too, like, for example, FICA. So some of those things went up. So all the salaries went up. Instead of 2%, that was changed now to 2.5% from the 2022 number. That was a council's request, order, maybe I should say, that you wanted it done. Now, in account 459, which is recreation, I changed the title there, the name, to Recreation Director. I think Mr. Lawrence calls it Recreation and Events Director or something like that, but I just shorthand used Recreation Director. I added a line item for health insurance since a new full-time employee is supposed to get benefits. And I removed the pool manager from, when I say I, by the way, I had the treasurer's assistants in going through all this, and Allison and Wendy, who's still acting as a consultant for us temporarily, both do a lot more with the salaries than I do. But in any case, we did add a line item for health insurance for a rec director because we would assume they would want it. And because the pool manager and assistant rec director merge into recreation director, the new position, I removed those two titles from the budget. So there's 0 now in 2023 for those two line items. Under administration, I removed the position of assistant manager when we were calculating the new salaries. That would help to save money. I've mentioned this before, and I really shouldn't talk about this other than an exec session. And of course, this is totally up to you, but my recommendation is you ought to reconsider eliminating the assistant manager position. Well, eliminating, you don't have it yet, but you're eliminating consideration of that. And I can explain reasons in exec session if you want me to talk about it. I don't really think it should be talked about here in public, but I think you ought to reconsider getting an assistant manager at some point.
Steve, would that have an effect on the budget? And we right now have a balanced budget.
Oh yeah, it would have an effect on the budget.
It
You'd have
would-
to find more revenue to
We'd have
do
to
it.
find a revenue for that.
Yeah, yes. Not to say you couldn't, you could, but I'm just saying it's not simple. And you know, you can still go into 2023 without it and then change your mind in 2022 and I'm sorry, in 2023 during the year and say, well, maybe we should find the money to do that. That's up to you. But I have some reasons why. I'd be happy to share them, but I'm not going to volunteer it because you may have your mind made up and not want to do it. And it's always council's prerogative, not mine. But I'll talk about it if you want me to. Not now, but in an exec session. And then other expenditure changes. I put some money back into Senior Citizen Center since we haven't sold that yet. I don't know how long we'll have it, but I put about 40% of the money back in because we have to maintain some water, some heat, some light there. You can't just totally shut everything off or else you really have a problem with the building. So I did do that. And then there were other changes that were made in expenditures. You can see in the middle of the screen there. The budget contingency is under one of the latter revenue expenditure categories on page 10. I reduced that slightly. We usually use that for things like the volunteer picnic and other unique things that may happen. We don't use a lot of it usually. That's why I thought I was able to reduce it. And I also reduced the budget reserve number because our budget reserve is about where the target that council wants as part of their policy. So I didn't think there was a need to have it at 25,000. I was told when we talked about the salary increases to eliminate the money going from general fund to capital one or the capital improvements plan. So in 492,018, I took that down to 0. And in 492,021, I took that down to 0. I also slightly reduced the transfer to road improvement because of the change in taxable assessed value that I mentioned earlier, because that's the 1 mil tax. And since it's going down slightly, I thought it should go down there.
Mhm.
Anybody have any questions about the expenditures that I made changes in? It's again, a balanced budget based on these changes.
Steve, I had a question.
Go ahead, Barb.
I don't know if it falls under these, but I'm just getting to the end of my first year and I'm trying to understand how it all works. I noticed under, I believe it was the parks, there was a salary listed and then benefits. Is there a parks employee?
No, what happened, I think I could be wrong about years because, as you know, I'm old and I can't remember things anymore, but I think it was about 8 or 10 years ago. Jim talked to council about it and he said one of our employees, their head groundskeeper in particular, is dedicated mainly to working related on parks and other stuff. Not that he doesn't do other things. He will come out and do snow runs, for example, and there's other things he's doing up at our building and here and there. But they decided it better reflected the money spent if we put his salary and benefits in the parks budget rather than as part of the regular public works budget. That's what happened. If you don't like that, council can always move it back, but that's where it is. He's head groundskeeper. Technically, he spends much more of his time, especially in the better weather months, doing that kind of stuff than he does other stuff. That's the reason for it.
Okay, I didn't realize there was a dedicated employee from Public Works doing that. Thank you.
So
You're
Steve, I have a question. I am looking at a DCNR grant for tree canopy management in the parks and on borough properties. And it has a match requirement. So I'm planning to use the budget that we allocate to the tree pruning and tree replacement, as well as I could include this park official's salary as part of the match, right?
Are you saying you could?
I'm
Sure.
asking. Okay.
Yeah, I think you could.
All right.
Again, well, 100% of his time is not dedicated to parks.
But
No.
some of the rest of it would be on borough properties of various
Yeah.
kinds. So I think we could stretch that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean,
The reason I ask is that if it's a 50-50 grant, the more we can put in as something we're already spending to
mhm,
use it as a match to leverage some additional funds, I think that would be helpful.
sure.
So
I
I'll
don't see
let
a
you know.
problem.
I don't know when the deadline is for this. I've been digging around for a while now, so.
Okay. A couple more slides and then I'm done.
Mhm.
Other budgets, I sent you every budget I had in the email. Corrective action, the major change there was the estimate for Alcoasand sewage treatment at
So-
1.8 million. The reason for that is because of the agreement every community that's part of Alcoasand has with Alcoasand. And you can see some of the wording from their letter about that agreement here. I'm not going to read it for you. You can read it yourself. Essentially, we have to budget funds that equal 120% of what their estimate is. And because not only are we supposed to pay Alcoasand that amount as an expenditure, we're also supposed to bill as part of a revenue that amount as well. So when we send that money out, the bills out, that's part of the Alcoasand sewage treatment stuff. Now, of course, if it isn't 120% that we actually that actually is part of the charge to Alcoasand, then we don't give them 120%. We give them what we owe, what they're owed. That's all. But that's part of their arrangement. So that's what we do. And then the other changes in other budgets, road improvement, like I mentioned, I estimated the receipts to be slightly less than what we had. I also changed the carryover dollars, reduced that significantly. I'm estimating much less carryover than I had in my preliminary budget, mainly because if you remember the road program, we had some things like Pacific Avenue, where there was a problem. We had to end up spending more money that comes out of the road budget. Part of it, a little bit of it came out of corrective action because some of it related to sewer, but overall it came out of the road budget. And so because of that, we're probably going to have less money next year than we had this year for paving improvements. So you'll still be able to do some roads. I just don't think you'll be able to do as many as you did this year. The capital improvements plan, that's always in flux. As I mentioned, we approve that as a formality, but council can always tinker with that throughout the year. You don't have to approve that necessarily. And it could change as 2023 goes on. So there really isn't any major change in that budget. Liquid fuels and fire services fee, there were no changes made there from the preliminary, but I still sent you the copies of them again anyway in the email. Any questions at all on anything in the budget, including anything I talked about earlier or anything at the,
Steve, I'm just wondering, as we're, moving forward, we have a very tight budget this year and a number of uncertainties. What kinds of things can we flag to track carefully as we're looking month to month in this coming year? I know we've had a significant decrease in litigation fees. For example, we had 20,000 last year. We only spent 8 this year. And I think you budgeted for 20, for next year. But I think being mindful that we have not been spending money on internal litigation as we had done in the past has been a big help. And I don't know if there are things that we should, keep track of and watch more carefully. Where are our most vulnerable places?
well, litigation always depends on anything unusual that crops up.
Exactly. It's
So you don't know.
unpredictable, right?
If there's a grievance, for example, now you're employing either Mr. Corbel for
Yeah.
non-uniform or
Or Mr.
Mr.
Palumbo or
Palumbo
something.
for police. The biggest issue right now is what's happened with the assessment.
Yeah.
If they make a decision, if this judge decides to go with a lower ratio and he decides that he doesn't decide that, that's not finalized until June. And he says, by the way, you can go back 6 months, you can go back a year, and you could appeal, and this is what your ratio should be. Then all of a sudden, we're going to be spending money, sending money back to people
Yeah.
because their assessment will have changed. That's, I think, the biggest thing.
Yeah.
Other than that, if again, to my opinion, is the pandemic is not over, despite what everybody thinks and says. And I think that could still be a problem. There's all these variants. There's still people getting sick. There's still people dying. And everyone's tired of it, so you don't hear about it. I think that's a problem. Those are the major issues, I think. I mean, in general, the other thing to do is, again, always look, when you're looking at the money, at the bottom line for both revenues and expenditures. Don't look at a line item and say, hey, we still have $5,000 here, let's spend it. Look
Mhm.
at the bottom line and see if you really do have that 5,000 still there. Again, a budget is just a plan. It's not a guarantee.
Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else?
I have a question,
Yeah.
Mr. Morris,
Sure, go ahead, Ms. Mark.
and thanks for having your patience with me. I
Oh.
kind of remember from, how it is, it's hard
That's
to
my
get-
job. I mean, it's what I'm here for. Go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, one last question. Under the fire protection services, wasn't there, I kind of remember from the beginning of the year, like a big payment was supposed to be made. Something, it was, I looked through there and I couldn't tell where that was put or listed.
There's a, what am I trying to say here? Let me pull it up on the screen. That'll be easier.
Okay, thank you.
I think this is it. Yeah. Right here, the fire truck lease payment was huge, 139,000,
Uh-huh,
because we had 2 payments there.
right.
One for the old truck, the last payment, and the first payment on the new.
Mhm.
That may be what you're referring to. That was the biggest change.
I thought we were getting money in as revenue, not expense.
For what?
He's talking about the 91,000 from the truck that they were going to pay us back.
Oh, well, that may come in and go toward this. Sure. Until I have it, I don't show it. I mean, if we don't have the money, it's not going to show. I mean, that's the way the bookkeeping should work. And when you're talking about it, what is it called now? A modified accrual system.
Right.
You show revenue when you actually get the money. You show expenditures when you incur the debt. So if we were to go out and charge something that we're going to get in 3 weeks, we show that expenditure right then. But if someone's going to pay us something in 3 weeks, we don't show it until they pay us. So
Okay.
that could be one thing too.
It was going to be paid in a prorated segments, right, Steve? They're doing so.
I'd have to go back and look. I don't remember exactly.
But the entire money was due this year. Is that correct? That was just my understanding. If you have to check on it,
I'd have
that's
to look
fine.
at it.
but-
I don't know. I'm
Thank
not
you.
sure.
Mhm.
Anybody else?
Good.
Well, if nobody has anything, this is the budget I'm offering to you. The main thing you have to approve is the general fund. Although I will still show all the numbers for every budget on there for approval because I think it's transparent to do that. If nobody has any objections, that's the budget I'm going to show as the one you would approve on December 14th as your final budget.
Okay.
The
And
only
Steve, you
issue
have a-
with the only issue with the general fund is you cannot change the bottom line on that in the future. Any other budget you can, but that budget you can't. You can move money around inside the budget once you approve it, but you can't change the bottom line.
And
Doesn't mean you couldn't get more money in. All of a sudden, if you get a grant or you get, the assessment goes up by $150 million, doesn't mean you couldn't get more money in. It just means that you can't change the bottom line. I'm sorry, did somebody have a question?
I just wanted to verify, we're going to keep the tax rate at 8 mils, so we don't need a tax resolution in this.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And I think
There'll
that's
be a
pending.
resolution on, there'll be a resolution for that,
Right.
not an ordinance, yeah.
Right. And when do you think we're going to know? We don't have any idea when the judge is going to rule on that assessment issue, do we?
No, I haven't seen anything.
Steve, do you
I mean,
have
the
any?
school district, the city of Pittsburgh School District is still appealing it.
Uh-huh.
And to be honest with you, some people, I don't understand how a judge in the county, and I'm not trying to take the side of I'm not trying to go against taxpayers, but I don't understand how a judge in the county can change the state level. Maybe Mr. Corbel would know how that's possible, but I don't understand how you can just change a state requirement for the, what is it called? The STEB? I forget what the State Tax Equalization Board, when they set the common level ratio at a certain number, how can somebody else say, well, that number has to be this, not that? I'm not sure that that's even legal, but I don't know. So.
All right. Thank you so much, Steve. This is a lot of work and I appreciate you and the staff, spending so much time and energy and giving your expertise to us for this. This is always a monumental undertaking. Under committee business report, the only thing I'd like to remark is that we did receive the Borough of Forest Hills audited financial report from Mockenhop, and they gave us a good report. The only thing I would like to point out is that they mentioned a number of variables that we've been talking about all evening in here that are still outstanding. And these will be in our budget message again. Unemployment rate uncertainty, a large number of employees working from home still, having forced closures of restaurants and other businesses. We have a number of business buildings in our community that are pretty much 80% vacant. And this is a concern that I have for our future tax stability. I'd like to do some things to address that if we can. And then the rest of this is just financial stuff. So I really think the other thing we haven't any handle on is the inflation rate over the coming year. That could have a significant effect on our estimated expenses, especially. We are going to be looking at some procurement issues in Connect to help communities do joint purchasing that might help to bring costs down for people for routine acquisitions. The only other thing I want to raise is that I am looking at a number of grants, not only with the tree canopy, but also through Siemens for funding some of the improvements that we're planning to make in our borough buildings and in our borough operations. We are going to try valiantly to get grant support for much of that material. And I also will be having a team of students working on our business district with us from CMU. So that will be probably going through the stakeholder group of the Environment Advisory Council as part of our climate implementation. So do any of my other committee members have any comments or observations regarding the budget this time?
I think it's fine, Patty. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jack.
Can I just add one thing?
Yeah.
You mentioned when you were talking about that mock and hop, you being case 7, you're looking at the budget.
I'm sorry, the case Sabatini.
Yeah, okay,
The
okay.
case Sabatini. I'm sorry. Sorry.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
They were on my mind.
Everybody should have that now. The only thing
Yeah.
I'm concerned about is it came so late. It should have been,
Yeah.
I think it should have been done months ago, but
Yeah.
you know, that's something
This
else
is
we
the
need to talk about.
2021, this is the 2021, independent audit. It always lags by a number of months. This one is really late.
Yeah, but it still gives you information that you should,
It does.
that could
yeah,
help. So,
It does.
okay.
And overall, it's a positive report. So I think we're in good shape. As Steve says, we operate in a above board and, fiduciarily responsible manner. So that includes our committee report at this time. And can adjourn this committee meeting.
Okay, just give me a few seconds and we can go to committee of the whole. I just want to save what I have here. Okay, I'm good with committee of the whole, and I guess Ms. DeMarco, that's you since you're vice
Yes, I
president.
will chair. Let me pull my agenda up if I can find it here. Ay. Okay. Okay,
You okay with me
the
starting?
manager's update will begin.
Yeah, okay.
Please.
So committee of the whole for December 6th, just really some notices, not anything you have to act on other than the first one. The engineer is applying for a COVID-19 small water and sewer grant for the Cherry Valley sanitary sewer replacement. So whenever we apply for a grant, usually they require a resolution from council indicating that council supports the application. So the resolution that is part of this grant is attached, and there's no objection, I would put it on as a motion for council to approve on December 14th.
Okay.
Does anybody want to take a minute on that, or were you okay with
Is
that?
there a match requirement for this grant?
I don't know. I don't have that. This came from Bob Ziskow from Glenn. I don't believe there is, but
Okay,
if it would be a match, it would come out of that
corrective
line
action
item for
budget.
corrective action.
Okay.
Okay. The only other thing I have are reminders. I know you don't have to do anything right now, but you do probably need to do something in January about the tax collector situation and what you're doing as far as any changes. Again, you have to do that by ordinance, so it has to be well in advance of the date when I guess petitions can start circulating, something like that. I know Mr. Erbaldinger has been talking with me about it a little bit. I don't know if that's something you folks have been talking about. I think in exec session, I've been at most of them, but it is something you need to pay attention to if you're going to make changes, because whoever's running has to know what those changes would be. So please pay attention to that. And I'm just putting it here as a reminder. I'll put it in January as well, if nothing's done with it. And then I have a number of the end of the year reminders, and mainly everything through November, I'm showing you what the action has been on that. In December, we've already gone through this in other committees, a new fee resolution, a new budget, a new tax resolution in this case, and then meeting dates and the police pension contribution. Those will all be action items on December 14th. I don't
Okay.
have anything else other than those informational things.
And on December 14th, we're doing the Citizens of the Year award to 2 people.
Right.
Is it of interest to people that we have a cake? Or is that going to be too cumbersome?
People would have to wait until the end of the meeting. I don't know if that's a good idea.
Okay. All right.
It's a nice thought, but
Okay.
Yeah, I kind of go with you on that one. Most of the people tend to they bring in their family and take some pictures and then they leave while we go on and on.
Okay. All right. Are there any other issues to be moved from other committees? There's a issue from the Environment Advisory Council. Do we have any information about what that is?
I was asked originally to move that to public safety, and
Oh.
Mr. Bioki said, no, it should really go to committee of the whole. I don't think there was an issue other than just anybody giving a normal report on it. But I don't know of anything going on there, so I moved it to that line item. Or that.
Well,
item,
actually, the other two, like the Tree and Shrub Committee and the Rec Board, actually, if we're going to do that with the Environmental Advisory Council, I thought it was specific to whoever the liaison was from council. But if it really isn't, and there's something to report, maybe we should just put all three under Kyle. What do you
I
think?
agree. I agree with that. Yep. Because, technically the EAC is under planning and zoning. But the liaison is not on planning and zoning. And we had them report under ops and policy for a while, I think, Jack. I'm not sure where they've ever gone. I think it's good to have those advisory councils report to Cal. I think it would be more productive and less confusing to people. I like that idea.
The only thing I would say is usually that's a decision of the president of council, so.
But we'll make a recommendation to the president
Yeah.
that perhaps he might consider such. And
Okay.
I think I like the idea of having all three of the major advisory reports come to Cal when they have actions for council to take. Do you have an opinion about that, Jack?
I have to give it a little bit of thought. Make sure I'm not muted here.
Okay.
I think I do.
Sorry.
Yeah, well,
Okay. All right, well, we can maybe, I'll talk to Marcus about it. Tom, I'll be right there. I have to get off.
You need to go to the solicitor report too, don't forget.
Okay, yeah, Mr. Corbel, would you please give a report?
Thanks. Good evening, everybody. Just a few things. Couple updates. I'll just give you them in general, and we can likely discuss in executive session if necessary. The 28 Wilkins zoning hearing board appeal to Compleas Court was resolved. We entered into a settlement agreement with them. And paperwork was filed last week to dismiss that case. So that's a positive. We do have a tentative agreement with Public Works on a collective bargaining agreement. The Public Works attorney is reviewing the language issues, and hopefully we'll have something in hand here in the next several days that we can share with council to take a look at. And, this is for Steve, that, there probably should be a motion on the agenda next week for approval or adoption of the collective bargaining agreement. There are a couple variance applications pending in front of the zoning hearing board. One is at 502 Berlin, and that's a variance on the front yard to reconstruct and expand what is an existing garage that is in some disrepair. And then there is another zoning hearing board variance request for 213 Lenox. And they want to place a retaining wall in their front yard. And it's a corner lot. So we've been here before, that can be kind of wonky. So they need a variance there, and we'll be going to the zoning hearing board. The Lenox matter won't be dealt with until next year. But the Berlin matter will be in the planning commission later this month, and possibly the zoning hearing board later this month too. I think we might try to get them scheduled at the same time in January, but the Lenox matter, they need to do a little more homework before that gets to the zoning hearing board. Three other quick items. On the tax collector compensation, I just wanted to remind council that in order to change the compensation and make it effective for the next term, that will need to be accomplished before petitions for that position can be circulated, which should be towards the end of February. So if you're going to change the comp there, you have to do it in January or at the latest your February meeting, so long as that occurs prior to the first day of petitions. I haven't looked at that date, but I can just double check that to make sure we're okay. So if there is any change that you'd like to make, that's the way to do it. Steve emailed me about the volunteer tax credit item that was on the public safety agenda. So this is a tax credit that is available to volunteer firefighters and EMS folks that live in the borough of Forest Hills. They do not necessarily have to work for your EMS provider or for your volunteer fire department. And then council has the ability to provide either or, that means either or both, a real estate tax credit or an earned income tax credit. The earned income tax credit is a flat rate. You can choose. Most places that I've dealt with have zeroed that in at like $500, I believe. And then on the real estate tax credit, you can choose a percentage or a flat rate that would be equal to up to 100% of the borough real estate taxes. This is just the borough real estate taxes and the borough share of the earned income tax, which obviously we share with the school district. So that's the flexibility that you have. You can choose how to, cut that up if you would like, if you want to do both or one or the other. It's a mishmash out there. I have a couple that are doing both, a couple that are doing real estate. And it's, in order to do that, you just have to pass an ordinance. I've done several of these, so it's pretty much a plug and play, if you know what I mean. For you all, we would be able just to plug in your selections, just make sure it comports with the remainder of the code of ordinances. And so it should be a pretty quick process if you wanted to go down that road. I don't know if did anybody have any questions about that?
Yeah,
Maybe I could send you all a sample ordinance from one of my other communities to look at.
That would be helpful.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep, I will do that.
Jack?
I'll send you all the one I did in McCandless, because they did both an earned income tax and a real estate tax credit. So then you can just see how both of those look. So I'll email that to Steve.
Jack
I'm
had a
sorry, Pat.
comment. I think Jack had a comment.
Yeah,
Go
two
ahead, Jack.
things. One is the issue with the tax collector's salary. We should probably just tonight make a decision which committee to put that on in January, so this doesn't fall through the cracks. And wherever that should be, where should that be?
Well, it's something, because it's a compensation issue, we could discuss in executive session, or if you put it on a committee. I don't know if I'm in a position to opine as to what committee it should be on, but it's probably a committee of the whole issue, I would think, Jack, just because everybody should have a say.
Okay, then if anyone unless you disagree, guys, why don't we put it on the January Cal, and then we'll have to do something about it. The other thing just to think about, folks, is as far as the EMTs, well, that would be anyone who works for Eastern Services too, who lives in the borough. But the majority of the EMTs on, say, Woodland Hills are very young. So I don't think most of them own houses. fact, I think a lot of them are still living at home and running a second job. So I'm not sure the real estate thing would be as beneficial to the EMTs as the earned income. Just a thought for future consideration. And that's all I have to say.
Yeah, Jack is right. That's why McCandless chose both, because those taxes affect different groups differently. There were retiree, volunteer fire departments that are of retirement age that aren't earning an income. So the real estate tax credit made more sense for them. And then they had the same concern Jack did about younger folks that may not be homeowners yet. So anyway, good food for thought, Jack. And then the last issue is your meeting is moved up a week. So I have, I'm already committed to Aspinwall that night. So I'm going to chat with Marcus about whether you want somebody and who I can send from my office, because it is Aspinwall's night, not your night. Not that I'm picking favorites, but that's sort of how I choose, unless there's something really crazy happening. And it doesn't seem like either location is having anything too out of the ordinary. So I'll talk to Marcus about that, and we'll have somebody there if that's what he thinks is best. So that's the end of my report.
I don't know, Steve. Sounds like you're picking favorites to me.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate
Just
that.
kidding. Just kidding.
Patty had to leave because of some issues. So I don't have anything else. Does anybody else have anything for Kyle, Committee of the Whole?
Oh,
So I would say we're done then. And if you're okay, I'll end the meeting for everybody, and we'll meet again in public, in person, December 14th, next Wednesday. I will try to have a draft agenda out to you by Friday to look at. And then on Tuesday, we'll get a final copy online on the website, rather. If you have any changes to what I send out, just let me know by Tuesday. Otherwise, good night, everybody. Sleep well.
Okay.
Have a good night.
Thanks.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Ending